Today, we're going to be doing some practical screening. We're going to talk about some ways that you can make screening as little frustrating as you possibly can. My name is Melanie Anderson. I'm one of the information specialists at UHN Library and Information Services. We also have 3 other folks from the library on the line. And they will be answering questions in the chat, dropping helpful links for you, and just generally helping you out during the course of this session. We've got Raluca, Ashley, and Biana, and they'll be in the chat and available as you need them. Before we get started, University Health Network operates on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. This land is the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Confederacy of the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 and remains home to many Indigenous, Inuit, and Métis people from across Turtle Island, and our library is grateful to have the opportunity to work and learn on this land. In addition to respectfully acknowledging the land and its First Peoples, we want to recognize that hospital libraries can play a role in legitimizing certain kinds of knowledge through the books and other resources we make available in our collections. Historically, libraries have privileged Eurocentric materials and ignored or excluded Indigenous knowledges. UHN Libraries is committed to providing a collection that supports Team UHN's efforts in working towards reconciliation. As you think about and develop your research, even if you're not working primarily with Indigenous populations, we encourage you to explore and learn from Indigenous methodologies and Indigenous-led research. Here are a few resources in our collection to help you get started. Scan the QR code for additional information. We're here to support your learning and your research, so please feel free to reach out to myself or any other library staff about these resources. So we're going to be brainstorming some inclusion and exclusion criteria, looking at a couple of screening tools, including Covidence, which is available through University of Toronto to anyone with a U of T email address, as well as a number of other institutions make it available. We're going to take a look at different of your criteria being easier to find in different parts of title and abstract and full text. And we're going to work through a quick little pilot screening to talk about how to improve agreement rates when you're doing your own review. What do you need to be able to screen? For systematic reviews especially, it's required in the various guidelines for systematic reviews that you need 2 screeners. For scoping reviews, the guidelines vary a little bit more, and you could argue that you could get away with 1 screener. I would recommend, and I think all of the information specialists here would recommend, that you go with 2 screeners, at least 2 screeners for scoping reviews as well. It's just a more thorough and bias-free way to manage your screening. You should be looking at guidelines for accomplishing systematic and or scoping reviews, depending on your project. At this point, there are a number of guidelines, and they will help you do the highest quality review possible. You'll need screening tools, and we'll talk a little bit about those in a little bit. You absolutely have to have established your inclusion and exclusion criteria before you start screening. It is pretty poor practice to decide as you do your screening what criteria you're going to use. So you need to have thought about this ahead of time. And obviously, before you start screening, you need to have something to screen. So you need your complete database results. You need to have your searches done. If you want more information about how to set yourself up to do screening appropriately, we have an online tutorial with information about guidelines and tools and all of those pieces. And Biana is going to pop that in the chat, the link to that, and please do feel free to take a look at that. So inclusion criteria versus exclusion criteria. In general, you do need both, and your inclusion criteria are what has to be there in order for you to use that paper, and the exclusion criteria are the things that, if they're there in the paper, make that paper not useful. You can't use that paper because that criteria is there. So sometimes these are going to mirror each other. So you could have criteria like um, you're only going to be looking at randomized control trials. So your inclusion criteria is randomized control trials. That's one of your criteria. And you could have an exclusion criteria that is anything that is not a randomized control trial. But they also don't always mirror each other. It's absolutely fine for them to mirror each other. There's not really such a thing as redundancy here. You're just aiming to make sure that it is as clear as possible what has to be there and what cannot be there in order for a paper to be useful. So um, I'd like to know what are some common inclusion or exclusion criteria that you've seen or that you are using. Um, we've got a link to a Padlet that's going to be going into the chat here. So I've set up a few little categories here. So criteria that are related to the topic, criteria related to the population, problem, intervention, comparator, or outcome. You might recognize that as PICO. Criteria related to the study design, and then a category for all of the stuff that doesn't fit into one of those categories. So I'd love to see what ideas you've got for the kinds of criteria that you have seen or that you're planning on using for systematic or scoping reviews. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes um, to add some criteria here. It looks like there's still a couple of people typing. So I'm going to give you a moment or two longer. Okay, let's start talking about these. So we have has to have a certain keyword. We've got demographic characteristics, age, gender, sex, marital status, ethnicity, occupation, language, etc. Population has to be adults only. Yeah, we see that one a lot. Age, gender, implementation versus identify gap. Yeah. Implementation or versus identifying a gap in the literature. That's a human only studies. Yeah, we see those a lot. Type of drug intervention must be specific. Yes, you need to be specific for sure. English only. Yeah, English only we see quite a bit. So these are all pretty standard, obviously, depending on the specific question that your review is trying to address. You're going to have different requirements and different criteria, and some of them are going to be pretty specific and some of them might be more general. So if we look at these and we think about how do we identify if something um, uh, if something uh, meets our criteria. It meets our inclusion criteria, and it does not meet our exclusion criteria. Some of these are going to be easier to spot than others, right? So if we've got a specific key event and anything that happened before that is not going to be relevant, but we want to see stuff that happened after that, obviously looking for a publication date is going to be pretty easy to spot whether or not that item should be included or excluded. And probably that can be part of your search, to just exclude stuff that's before a certain event. That's pretty easy to deal with. Things like demographic characteristics like age, gender, sex, marital status, etc. Depending on the paper, that might be really easy to identify. So if it's a paper specifically about a pediatric population, you can decide, like, if you're interested in a pediatric population, yay, you've got that, it's met that criteria. And if you're looking for adults, then you can throw it out pretty easily, just from that one criteria. On the other hand, if you're looking at a kind of study where they've taken a huge chunk of the population and there's a lot of, they've got all different ages, then in order for you to decide whether that paper is going to be useful, you need to really be able to tell whether they've broken out the data for the group that you're interested in. And so that might require that you look at full text. So as you're planning out your criteria, good idea to think about, now where are we going to find this information, and at what stage of screening? So let's get back to our slides here. So that's going to be a big part of how you're going to figure out how to go quickly, because screening can take an enormous amount of time. It tends to sort of be the not always, but often the step of the review process that takes the most amount of time. It's just, you're going through thousands and thousands of records, with at least two people looking at everything. It can take a really long time. So you want to figure out how to do it quickly. So identifying what criteria you're using and where you're going to find the answers to those criteria is a pretty important step. But you'll also want to do things like make sure you get familiar with the tool that you're using and that you are using it as efficiently as possible. We'll take a look at Covidence shortly, just to show you some of the features that can help you get through screening faster. Ideally, you're not going to read the whole thing. You're going to identify what criteria you're going to find where. You're going to go to the places in the title and abstract that are going to answer your question, and then you're going to make a decision. And you want to start with the easy no's. So for instance, if we're using that RCT example, if that's a criteria, then the first thing you're going to do when you're looking at each record is identify if it's an RCT. And if it's not, you don't have to read anything else. You don't have to do anything else. You just have to say no, because it hasn't met your criteria. And then the last piece, and I throw this in because this has come up during screening for projects that I've worked on in the past, and that is, people get stuck on stuff that they find interesting, but that doesn't meet their criteria. And they're like, but it's so interesting, but it does not meet your criteria. If it doesn't meet your criteria, it's a no. If it's interesting, that's wonderful. Set up a plan for yourself ahead of time to have a way to identify those for later. So if you're looking at something and you're like, this doesn't meet our criteria, but I would love to use this in the background section or in the discussion section, then have a tag set up. Have some system set up ahead of time where you can quickly put it somewhere where you're going to be able to find it later, and then be able to stop thinking about it until you're done screening, at least. It's a really easy thing to get stuck on. So our next step is to take a really quick look at Covidence. Covidence, again, UHN does not provide it, but for everybody who's working on a team that has at least one person who has a U of T email address, you can set up through the U of T's subscription. And this is a tool where you load all of your citations. It does, you can let it do deduplication for you if you would like. If you want to do deduplication in a more controlled manner, because we don't really have good stats on how high quality of a job it does on the deduplication, please talk to your information specialist. We can set you up with instructions for doing deduplication outside of Covidence. And then once it's got all of the citations in there, you can play with the settings and get it to just show each member of the team the citations that are available for them to screen. It keeps track of who voted for what. It'll give you a place to go to look at the records that people have disagreed on so that you can deal with those. And it keeps track of all of the numbers and gives you a little Prisma flow diagram that you can use at the end. So this is a project, this is a demo project in Covidence, so it's not a real one. But this is basically what it would look like. This is the button to go to the screen where you can import your citations, so load them in here. This is what I would see if I was screening. I can see, there are 8 records that have had at least 2 people vote on them, but there's 118 that only have 1 vote, so I would be the second voter, and I can vote on those here. The material that's passed through screening will show up in full text review next, and then after it's gone through full text review, it'll go into extraction. You can change the settings in here, and this is where you find things like deciding how many reviewers need to look at each title and abstract for screening, how many people need to look at each item in full text review, how many people need to do data extraction, and you can also add settings like who can do what, so everybody can do everything, or you can piece it out so only one person is allowed to load articles, and these people are only allowed to do screening, and however you would like to manage that. You can also add reviewers from here. So the person who starts the project has to have a U of T email address, but all of the other members of the team can just have UHN email addresses or other email addresses. You don't need everybody, just as long as one person has a U of T email address. And they also have a place where you can load your eligibility criteria, your inclusion exclusion criteria, so that while you are doing the screening, you can look at those easily and not have to sort of flip back and forth. And this is what the screening screen looks like. So here's the record. Those are my voting buttons. If I wanted to see the criteria, there'd be a button. If there were criteria loaded, I would hit this button and go, oh yeah, we said that we did or didn't want this, and then make my decision without having to go anywhere else to find that. Also, if you load criteria, it will do some highlighting for you. If you like identifying terms that are potentially relevant, just sort of highlighting them so you can see them better. Now, this is a paid product, and you can access it for free through U of T as long as you have a U of T email address. There are options that are free or free-ish. So Rayyan has very similar functionality to Covidence. It does have a free option. The free option has fewer features than the paid options, but it's available. It can get you started, and you don't necessarily need to have somebody on the team who has a U of T email address to do that. It used to be completely free, but they have started charging for some of the features. So, and this is what the screening looks like there. So the buttons are down here. You can assign reasons. You can assign labels, all of those things here. So let's talk really briefly about Aboutness. So Aboutness is a word that, as far as I know, a professor that I had in library school made up. I don't actually know anybody else who uses it, but I find it useful for when doing screening because one of the things that I see when people are doing screening is that the different screeners all have different interpretations of uh, what a given title and abstract are about. So usually, especially for a systematic review, but often for a scoping review as well, it's not enough that the paper mentions the thing that you're interested in. It usually needs to be actually about the thing that you're interested in. Um, and that might vary depending on the question that you're asking. So you might be thinking about aboutness more broadly for one kind of question for one kind of review than you would for a different question or a different kind of review. So I wanted to give some examples because that's a little bit of a difficult thing to wrap your head around. Of course, you want something that's about the thing, but that can be, more or less difficult to figure out. So if we're looking for articles that are about preventing student burnout, would we think that this is a an article that we should include because it is about the thing that we're looking for, which is preventing student burnouts? Well, so on the one hand, you could argue that identifying people who are less prone to burnout is preventing burnout by putting stress tolerant people in the stressful positions and putting the less stress tolerant people in the less stressful positions. On the other hand, um, based on this, like they're not stating that their purpose is to prevent burnout. So you could argue that it is not. For this example, same thing that we're looking for, preventing student burnouts. You could argue that identifying the factors that are associated with burnout, which is what this article is aiming to do, can is simultaneously identifying the factors that need to be altered in order to prevent burnout. Like if we know what causes it, then we can um, figure out how to not have those situations occur. But on the other hand, it's really about how burnt out students are and what contributes to burnout. So it's, if you were being very encompassing, you could say, well, identifying the things that cause burnout helps you prevent burnout. And on the other hand, you could say, but they don't actually say they're trying to prevent burnout. That's not what they say they're doing. For our third example, we've got an article which is about an intervention that was meant to improve sleep habits, which is meant to reduce burnout. So it's sort of 3 steps, right? We're doing an intervention to improve sleep habits, and we're hoping that improving sleep habits reduces burnout. And in the end, they found that their intervention didn't really improve sleep habits, and they don't have, and they therefore also can't connect it to preventing burnout. So it on the preventing burnout score, it's kind of a null, which doesn't mean we don't use it. You could also argue that this is mostly about an educational intervention to improve sleep, and that um, ultimately there's not there's not uh, a there's not a direct uh, prevention of burnout happening here. It's really about improving sleep habits and whether sleep habits correlate with aspects of burnout. So we're not going to really do any full text screening, but I wanted to bring it up because there have been questions about full text. Most of full text screening looks pretty identical to title abstract screening. You need two screeners, you need to use a screening tool, you still have to use your criteria. The difference is that you're using the full text instead of the title and abstract. So that does mean that you have to find the full text for everything that has passed through to full text screenings. And depending on how many gets through to full text screening, that could be a pretty large number of full text. Covidence and EndNote are both set up to find open access articles so that they can both find some full text for you. EndNote is also, they have features that will help you find full text that is not open access but is available to you through specific libraries. And if you're using EndNote and you would like to use that feature, definitely talk to your information specialist. We can set you up with the instructions for how to do that. But for everything that either Covidence or EndNote can't find for you, you're going to have to look for. And that's going to mean thinking about what libraries you have access to and searching those libraries for those full text. Obviously, you can Google for them. You might not be able to find things. There's going to be things that your libraries don't have subscriptions to and that you can't find via Google. And that's where services like interlibrary loan, which pretty much every library has some kind of interlibrary loan option. Usually it's either free or inexpensive, and usually it doesn't take very long for articles to come in because they usually come in electronically. We don't have to wait for the mail anymore. So that's an improvement. You may also find that there are some articles that even your interlibrary loan services can't track down, and in those cases, it's potentially a good idea to start contacting the authors to see if they can send you the full text. Um, Once you've got all of the full text, then you start doing the full text screening. Again, you need the same number of screeners. Good idea to use screening tools, and you still need to apply your same criteria. So, and again, if you don't have to read the whole article, don't for the screening part. Just go to the objectives section. Just go to the methods section. Whatever section's going to have the answer for your inclusion exclusion criteria, just look at that part. At the screening stage, don't spend the time to read the whole article. You want to get through this as quickly as possible, or else it'll be very tedious indeed. Okay, so then we've got a little activity for you. One of the really, really important steps for doing screening is to do pilot screening before you get started. And so what this looks like in general would be you would pull 10, 15, maybe 20 records from your results, and you would have the screeners all screen them using the criteria that you've set up, and then you would compare notes. Like, did everyone agree on all of these? If people disagreed, why did they disagree? And this way, by running a pilot round or two pilot rounds or maybe even three pilot rounds, you can hopefully get everybody on the same page so that there's as much agreement as possible to make your screening, first of all, go smoothly, and second of all, make sure that things aren't going to be slipping through that should have been included because people weren't understanding the criteria the same way. So let's try screening together. We're going to give you 5 minutes. There's 4 title and abstract records, and Bianna's going to pop that link in the chat, and then we'll discuss your answers once you've gone through that. All right, so we've had a few people vote. I'm just going to refresh one more time and see what we've got. So we can see that we have really good agreement on record 1. Everybody has said no to record 1. For record 2, we've got 2 no's and 3 yeses, so we're pretty split there. For record 3, we're vice versa with 2 yeses and 3 no's. And for record 4, we've got 2 no's and 3 yeses. So we can see that we don't have good agreement on our inclusion exclusion criteria just yet. So let's look at record 2, 3, and 4. I feel like we're all pretty solid on record 1, so let's just do record 2, 3, and 4. And maybe people can talk about why they voted different ways. So this is record, jump to page 2. Okay, record 2. So we've got record 2 here. Our inclusion exclusion criteria, we're looking for any study type that discusses interventions or strategies for managing post-exertional malaise, and they need to be in the English language. For exclusion, we're excluding editorials or commentaries, and we're excluding things that don't discuss interventions, and we're excluding things that are in a language other than English. So, record 2. Does anybody want to talk about what they voted and why they voted that way?
I guess I'll start. I'm pretty sure I said yes to this one
Okay.
because if you can scroll back up to the inclusion criteria for me, um, the inclusion it discusses intervention strategies for managing post-exertional malaise. Initially, I put no on this, but then I read in the last in the conclusion part of the abstract that HRM does help with PEM, understand and manage their PEM and support them to increase their activities. So to me, that says that even though there are limitations, they were talking about interventions and strategies.
Okay. That makes sense to me. That makes sense the way that you voted. Did anybody vote no? And would you like to talk about why you voted no? Okay, can I get a show of hands for who agrees with Curtis based on what he said about why he voted the way he did? Okay, we got at least one person agreeing with you, Curtis. Anybody else?
I voted no.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Hi, you voted no?
Yeah, because I thought it was talking about the attitude and experience using HRM, not actually the HRM and how that intervention affects the myalgia.
Yeah, it does. There is an element here of its experiences and attitudes towards pacing using a heart rate monitor. So it seems to be less, not necessarily about like how well it works. So then this would be a piece where, depending on the type of paper that you were doing, I think we said this was going to be a scoping review. Did we? I think so. Um, then you might discuss with the rest of the screeners, like, okay, it is doing this, but it's not doing that. How do we feel about that? If we were to encounter another paper in the future that was doing something similar, would we say that it should or should not be included? And so there may be a short discussion about that. There may be a long discussion about that, but that would be part of how you're doing your how you're doing screening. So the team would come to an agreement, and everybody would agree to manage this type of record in the same way.
Yeah, got it. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. So then let's see if record 3 is has anything else to teach us. So record 3, there's no abstract, which is always very annoying when you're screening. So all you've really got to go on is the title, Attenuating Post-Exertional Malaise in Myalgic Encephalomyelitis, Chronic Fatigue Syndrome, and Long COVID. Is blood lactate monitoring the answer? We've got the authors. We know what journal it's in, and there's no abstract, but we do know it's a review, so there's that. And people were split on this one. Does anybody want to say anything about how they voted and why?
I'll speak up again. I just said no. That's exactly why I did it too. It's not really entirely clear what it is. And
Yeah.
I mean, yes, for our preview here, there's only 4 things we're looking at, but for an actual review, I'm sure there would be more than 4 records. So how many of these are coming up as no abstract? Do we have time to actually go back and see a full text and read through it and make sure it's actually what we were looking for? So that's
Yeah.
the only reason I said no.
Yeah, the no abstract thing is a real quandary for screening, and you do run into it a lot. Um, there's there are certain kinds of articles that are more likely to have no abstract, but this is a review article and it does not have an abstract. So like often you'll see no abstract for things like it's an editorial or a letter to the editor or something. But in this case, it's an actual review article. Um, um, so you would expect it to have an abstract, and it's not here. So that is something that that again your team is going to need to decide how to deal with. For reviews, it would generally not be considered good practice to eliminate things on the basis of them not having an abstract available, unless there's another reason. Another reason to exclude them. So if the title was like really off topic or like it was in the wrong language or it was the wrong kind of article or whatever, then that's a pretty easy exclude. And then uh, if the title is sort of vaguely on topic, but there's no other information, often the recommendation would be to sort of pass that through to full text and look at it. But again, if you've got thousands and thousands of records with no abstract available, that's going to get pretty unmanageable to look at full text for all of them. So your team's going to want to have a plan ahead of time for how to deal with situations like that. Yeah, so this is a difficult one for sure. And yeah, if this was a real um, um, pilot, we would have more inclusion and exclusion criteria. Obviously we would. This is not an actual good list, but we don't really have time for the whole thing. So we've only got 5 minutes left. I'm going to put the 4th one up, and if anybody wants to say anything about it, they can. And otherwise, if anybody has any questions or wants to talk about anything to do with screening, now is a good time to do that before we're at time. Does anybody have any questions or anything that you want to talk about, or anything that I skipped over that you'd like to know more about? Okay, not hearing anything. Um, Thank you everyone for joining. It's been good to see everyone here today. We're happy for you to get in touch with us after the session, answer any questions. There have been a number of times today when I've said, for more information, please contact your information specialist. You can find your information specialist at UHNLibraries.ca and then go to the contact us piece page, and that will help you find your IS. Or if you can't tell which person would be your information specialist, then there's another email address that you can use to get in touch with the library so we can connect you with the right person. I believe Raluca is going to drop the link for the evaluation form in the chat. We'd love to hear from you to find out about things that you would like to see the library offering in the future. And if you want to find out about any new resources or workshops or other programming, please join our mailing list and you'll be the first to know for any new anything new coming out of the library.